All right, you guys, welcome and thank you so much for joining me for this overview on DISC. As many of you know already, this is a behavior assessment tool that I am quite fond of because I don't know about you guys, but early on in my career, as a young leader especially, I would find some of my interactions a little bit tricky, a little bit hard to navigate. And I would be in conversations with people sort of thinking they're not receiving this information maybe the way that I'm intending, or they're not responding the way that I would have imagined. Or I personally also had an experience of receiving some feedback that I wasn't too sure about. And so, what that quickly taught me as a young leader is truly that humans are very different. And that really a big learning early on in my career is that not everybody is like me. And that, as obvious as it may seem, I think is a lesson that sort of keeps giving all the time. And I think DISC is a really great tool. It's a great way for us to sort of get to know ourselves quickly and get to know some of the different people that exist out there, exist in the world, exist in our workplaces, exist in our personal lives. So our agenda for today is to really give you a snapshot as to why DISC, how we use it, how it can be leveraged, and sort of understanding the highs and lows of a DISC profile and what that means for different behavioral styles, and how to take that data, how to take that information and use it in your important conversations, use it in those key relationships in order to develop stronger partnerships. So a little bit about the why, the who, the how, and let's get started. So, as some of you already know, Better Your Best is a boutique management consulting company. We offer coaching, training, consulting to small businesses to help develop leaders, help align teams, and execute strategy. We are a team of coaches and consultants who sort of come in and out of organizations as needed to address their sort of organizational challenges. We believe that results to achieve results in an organization, we really need this inside out approach. And so that's why we do start with leaders. We do start with executive coaching and leadership. Then we move to working with teams, to aligning their teams around how do they best communicate with each other? What are the objectives? And then finally, what is the plan and how do we achieve those results? So that just gives you guys a quick snapshot on who is Better Your Best. And what we want you to know is the work that really influences what we do is this belief that the ability to have important conversations, the ability to have courageous conversations is what drives strategy. That too often in organizations, we see people have these plans or know what the priorities are, but people are avoiding the difficult conversations. I think communication in the next 20, 30 years is going to be a really fascinating field as different generations continue to learn how to communicate with each other. This ability to step up or step in and have these important conversations, I think is going to be a real game changer, because I think the generations coming behind us have not been equipped or given the tools to do so effectively. And so DISC is sort of some great underpinnings. It's the first start to really having this ability to have those important conversations that our businesses need in order to drive success. We believe that that ability to have that conversation is a significant contributor to high performing teams. And that when teams show up with vulnerability and trust through having important conversations, that's just a way to demonstrate vulnerability and trust, combined with personal accountability, combined with a commitment to the organization, and finally, courageous conversations, that's where companies get results. So it really is the winning formula that aligns teams, and their ability to have the conversations that will address the opportunities, the problems, and the challenges that the organization is facing. So I share this all with you, this high, big level picture, to sort of make the case for the why DISC. Because DISC really is that first step that leaders can take to know themselves better, to better understand others, and to better understand how to communicate more effectively with one another. I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a few minutes, but first I want to give you a bit of background on DISC. So DISC isn't just some like trendy new assessment that all organizations are doing. DISC is rooted in the work of an American psychologist named William Moulton Marston. He's the founder of the lie detector test. He wrote a book called The Emotions of Normal People. So his work has been researched and validated and is being used over and over and over again in many different ways. People will come to me and say, oh, I did this assessment or I did that assessment. And quite often what I'm seeing is it's a lot of them, except for Myers-Briggs, that's a totally different science, are really rooted in this work, and that people are just putting different lipstick on it. But DISC, William Moulton Marston, he's the founder, he's the real deal. Now, how are people using DISC? People are using DISC to benchmark for key roles and key hires. Like, no longer are we just going to go out there and hire for someone based on sort of like how we get along with them. These days, we need to hire for experience, education, values, but also we need to hire for their ability to get the job done. And we assess that by knowing their core competencies and their capabilities, along with, do they demonstrate the behaviors that drive those core competencies, those capabilities. They are also using DISC to create stronger working alliances. I always tell my clients, if you're ever hiring someone new, take time in the beginning of that relationship to do what I call design a working alliance. Use the data from the DISC to set yourselves up for success in your partnership by exploring the data of the DISC to really know, how do I like to be communicated with? How do I like to be recognized? How do I feel about change? How do I feel about planning? DISC really can give us the DNA, or sorry, the data to have that conversation, to create that healthy relationship right out of the gate. Whenever there's conflict or tension in an organization, we can pull out a comparison report to have two people sort of talking about each other in a very non-threatening way. We can look at it in terms of, what does our data mean for the team makeup? If we're a fast-growing organization, do we have the right behavioral profile to move quickly? Or if we are more if we're a company like an engineering company that needs to be risk averse and safety is number one, do we have the right people on our team that are going to adhere to some of the policies, procedures, standards that we need from an engineer or an engineering firm? And then lastly, like I said, is really just deciding, like, what does our winning team look like? Who's the team that we need in order to achieve our objectives? And do we have the right balance of behavioral profiles to achieve those objectives? So that is how we're using this data. It can be sliced and diced in so many ways. So DISC is the universal language of how we do what we do. Once you start to get to know DISC, you're going to start to see it everywhere. And it might take a little while, but we see it commonly in popular media, in books, in TV shows, in movies, that we sort of have these 4 different archetypes that keep showing up over and over and over again. So what does DISC stand for? D stands for dominance. It has to do with problems and challenges. It has to do with really a pace, this real desire to go and solve problems and solve them quickly. I stands for influence. Influence is all about people. It's about influencing people to our way of thinking. It's about big ideas. It's about visions. So people, big ideas is all under the influence umbrella. S stands for steady, and it relates to the pace of the environment. So high steady means people like to finish, get things done, follow through. A low S is someone who is pioneering, likes to have lots of balls in the air, doing different things, never wants to have the same day twice. And finally, C stands for compliant. Compliant speaks to this desire to have a plan, to follow a plan, to have rules and regulations set by others. That's key. They like a plan set by others. So as you can see from the Big Bang Theory, their different characters all sort of fit into these different behavioral styles. So what I want you to do right now, I'm not going to ask you about it, but just put you on the spot with your own notebook or in your head. If you haven't done the assessment, based on sort of some of these definitions, which behavioral profile do you think you are? So take a moment and pause and consider, am I someone that's driven to respond to problems and challenges? Am I someone that's sort of driven to people and big ideas? Am I someone who really just likes a steady, agreeable place? And then finally, am I someone who just likes to know what the plan is and execute? So take a moment only for yourself and decide which one are you. So a little bit more on DISC, because the way the assessment shows up, we sort of see this high and low, which can sometimes make our brains think that there's a good and a bad. And the reality is, like anything in life, there's a good and a bad to being high, and there's a good and a bad to being low. So what the first thing you're going to do when you do complete your assessment is look at what your primary behavioral style is above the midline. Of these four colors, which is the one that is the highest above the midline? That will tell you what your primary behavioral style is. And so if you're a high D at the highest level, what that means is in extreme situations, you can come across as aggressive, moving really quickly, sort of just like a bull in a china shop, wanting to get things done. On the low side, a low D means that you're very reflective. It means that you do a good job of considering both sides of a coin, of maybe considering a few scenarios, of moving slowly and deliberately in order to make the best decision. A high I under extreme pressure can be seen as maybe a bit dramatic and overly optimistic and sort of doubling down on their great idea. Commonly, like I said, high I's just love people, love big ideas, and they just want to be, best friends with the whole world. I say that because that's what I am. I'm a high I. I speak to it naturally. A low I is someone who is realistic. They might be a lot slower to trust, and they look for just like the practicality of a situation versus like being overly optimistic in terms of what an idea might yield. A high S, like I said before, is someone who is predictable. They hate change for the sake of change. They want consistency. They really, really, really can feel things in a really unique way. They're always being considerate of their ecosystem. They're sort of wanting to make sure that everybody is okay and that the ecosystem's okay. So they're steady, they're predictable, they like following through. Low S's are driving. They like a lot of balls in the air. They don't want that consistency. They always are sort of maybe being pulled towards shiny objects just to keep things sort of the pace fast and things really interesting for them. A high C, as I mentioned already, likes to be compliant, likes to follow the rules, is risk averse. They want to know that when they're going to do something, they're going to do it right the first time. The concept of like learning in action is very uncomfortable for them. A high C can often suffer from analysis paralysis, that they will look to all extremes, all different scenarios before moving. And that can be a detriment if they don't move forward. However, it can also be an advantage in that they can provide some of the data that maybe a D or an I might miss in their sort of quick impulsive thinking. A low C, pioneering. They believe that rules are made to be broken, and they are big risk takers. They have a tough time sort of staying within the guardrails or following the policies and procedures. So what's important to know about this graph is really whether you're a high D or you're a low S or a low C or a high C, that there's gifts and drawbacks to each of those primary behavioral styles. And that as leaders, it's important to know, what's my primary behavioral style? What am I naturally sort of drawn to? Problems, people, pace, or compliance plans. And what does that mean for getting my work done? What does that mean for aligning with others on my team? What does that mean for my communication? When we do this assessment, the assessment will measure your natural style and your adapted style. And what we're looking for when we see these two graphs is any changes greater than 10 points. So what you're looking at is my behavior assessment. I'm a high I, someone who loves people, with a relatively high D, so I like to get things done, and a low C, who is not afraid to take some risks. If you look here, you can see at the time of this assessment, I was pushing my C up a little bit. So on the right, on my natural style, I'm a 14, but on my adaptive style, my C is a 26. What I would say to that is, probably at the beginning when I did this assessment, and I would say that that's probably 10 years ago, I was just trying to push the C up a bit to be a bit more compliant in starting a business, to incorporate a few more policies and procedures, to check a few more boxes. It's not a massive adaptation, but it's enough to talk about. So you just want to look for that. If there's any major adaptations in your graphs, reach out to us and we would love to chat with you about that. Commonly, what that can mean is that you're at the beginning of a new role, you've just experienced some change, or you're under some sort of pressure. The organization has you needing to do something that might be sort of outside of what I call your zone of genius. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. It doesn't mean that adapting is bad. It just means it's something that we should pay attention to, both as leaders and as employees, to say, well, what's the cause of it? How long will this be going on for? And is this really what's best for the organization? That's a place where I can tell quickly if someone is suited for the role, if they are adapting significantly, but also it might just be a stage of the business. So for example, an introvert needing to do outside sales, they can do that, but is it the best solution for the business over the long haul? Not necessarily. A question I often get asked is, will your DISC change over time? And really the answer is no. Unless you experience a significant life crisis, the chances of you moving from being an extrovert to an introvert or an introvert to an extrovert are sort of slim. So it can happen, but I would say for the average population, your primary behavioral style will always be your primary behavioral style. I will always be a people person. So I call this the money slide, because this, when you can really get to know DISC, helps you in understanding people. It really helps you in understanding people, understanding what's important to them, and understanding what they might be avoiding. Humans are commonly sort of driven towards what they want, or they avoid what they are afraid of. And so when we can understand sort of the emotion and the fears involved with each of these behavioral styles, it can really help us in collaborating with others, and in negotiating with others, and in leading others. So what's really important to know here is that each primary behavioral style comes with an associated fear. Humans have lots of fears, and commonly we all share the same fears, but some of these fears are more heightened for different behavioral profiles than others. So the next time you are in a difficult conversation or experiencing conflict within your organization or tension, I would encourage you to stop for a second to say to yourself, who am I talking to? What is their primary behavioral style? And what might be the fear, or what I like to call the cattle prod, that is influencing this conversation, that is influencing this conflict, that is influencing this behavior? If in these difficult situations you can slow down and pay attention to that, I think it really, 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 well, I don't think, I know it can help you set a conversation up for success so that you can both move forward positively together. So D's deepest fear is a fear of being taken advantage of. I's deepest fear is a loss of social recognition, or sort of not being liked or not being involved or not bringing credibility to a process. And S's deepest fear is a loss of security. Like I said before, an S has the superpower of knowing viscerally what is happening within an organization. And therefore, when they feel uncomfortable or are not at ease, they will commonly not say anything because they don't want to disrupt the ecosystem. However, what I will say is that given time, S's will put their feelings to words and can be a huge asset to organizations in terms of what they're seeing and noticing based on what they're feeling, but they need to be given time. So people will say, well, why didn't you just speak up in that meeting? Why are you saying this now, 24, 48 hours after the fact? The reality is they just needed a little bit more time to process, to put words to their feelings. I will say that 2/3 of the population actually are of the S behavioral profile. So there's a lot of S's in the world. Finally, that C's deepest fear is a fear of making mistakes. Like I said, they want to know that they've gotten it right the first time. We commonly see high C's as doctors, as airplane pilots, as engineers, truly professionals who've been given a script their whole lives. If you do this, then you get that. If you do this, then you get that. And they take comfort in that. And they are high performers. But when we are playing in a place of like uncertainty and there's no plan and it's loose and it's vast, that just is sort of chaos for them. It's fear making for them. So the C's really want to know that they're going to get it right the first time, and that we're not going to make any mistakes. So as you can see with all these different behavioral profiles, people are motivated towards something, maybe fixing a problem, influencing others, having a steady pace, while also avoiding other things. And so when you start to think about it, this is where some of that tension can be created within an organization and on teams. What I want you to do right now, again, just for yourself, is think about someone in your life who is different than you, who might challenge you a little bit. I see Ryan laughing there. I love it. Who might challenge you a little bit. I want you to stop for a second and think about, based on all these descriptions, which is their primary behavioral style. And knowing that, what is your primary behavioral style? And what are you sort of seeing or observing around how your styles are interacting with each other? So just take a couple moments to reflect on that, maybe write down a few notes. Who's someone that challenges you? What's their primary behavioral style? And what do you think your primary behavioral style is? And what does that mean for communication? Because the platinum rule in communication is that we need to slow down to consider who we are talking to in order to give them information in the way that they want. Because listening happens communication happens on the listener's terms. That we need to be adapting ourselves to communicate with people in the way that they need. I'm just going to pause there for a second. We need to adapt our communication styles to the way that the person who is receiving the information wants to receive it. So things like using their language, things like knowing, like a D and a C is really interested in the facts. It's is really interested in the data. An I and an S are really interested in people. So D's and C's really want to know what's the facts, what have you analyzed, how can you back up your thoughts with some proof, some validity. I's and S's don't really care so much about that data. They'll do it, they'll find it, but they really care about their idea. They care about the people. They care about how this is going to impact people around them. That's especially an S. So really slowing down to know who you're talking to, talk in terms of in ways that is meaningful to that person, and be aware of how they are receiving your information is critical to stronger communication. Each one of you will receive our little DISC Insights card. I'll be sending you an email tomorrow. And this is a little cheat sheet on how to recognize who you're talking to and some of the do's and don'ts for communication. So I'm not sure, I know the word's quite small on the screen, but just to emphasize what I'm saying, D's want you to be clear. They want you to be concise. They want you to back things up with facts. Quite often with D's, we say, be brief, be bold, be gone, get in and get out. I's want you to sort of provide a warm and friendly environment. They might want you to ask them how their weekend was, how their kids are, how that last project went that they might have been struggling with. They want to sort of leave that time for relating. S's are really looking for that authenticity, that sincerity. So again, slowing down a little bit to relate, but also present your idea in a way that has taken into account the ecosystem and the key stakeholders in the organization and what that means for them. And then the C's is prepare your idea backed up by data, by research, by as much information as you can. Really show a C that you've thought this through and that you've considered all of the risk and all of the sort of like rules, the policies, procedures that might influence it. So all of this information you will receive on the DISC Insights card, but I just share with you again to further illustrate that we are all quite different. So this is just a copy of that Insights card. On one side, we have the do's and don'ts of communication. And then on the other side, we have some little tips on terms of like what they value, what they dislike, how they make their decisions. All of this is just such great information to have to sort of like orient yourself towards before any of your important conversations. So we've talked about self. And knowing how to sort of understand your primary behavioral style and what that means for each person. We've talked about others. We've talked about the need of communicating in the terms of the listener in order to be effective. And then the third place we can use DISC is looking at the roles these different behavioral profiles play on a team. So this colored graph, this colored wheel really shows the blend of our top 2 primary behavioral styles. So what you're looking at right now is, it's actually a board of directors. I'm not going to tell you what board, but you can sort of see where everybody sits. You can see that for the most part, when we plot this organization, everybody is either an ID or like an SC, that this organization is really weighted towards people. It's really weighted towards people, which is great in the work that this organization does. You know, if they were looking to grow and sort of right size their operations, they might want to consider having another analyzer on the team, or they might consider having that implementer on the team. Those are the roles at the top where you can see that there's not really any people in that top half of the circle. What's important to know here is that we don't really need everyone in every single role in the organization. What we need to know is what are the objectives of the organization and what's the team that we need to achieve those objectives. Like I said in the beginning, if we are a fast-moving organization, we're going to want to see a lot of D's and I's and know that they're being supported by S's and C's. Or if we are more sort of risk-averse organization, we're going to want to see a lot of S's and C's. These are extreme examples to just illustrate the point that it's important for us to consider our team makeup in pursuit of our objectives. Because what we commonly see in organizations is like hires like. And that doesn't always mean that that is the best makeup to achieve our objectives. Because realistically, what we need to do is we need to be partnering with others that are different than us. We need to be leveraging our different behavioral strengths or different behavioral style in order to partner and collaborate more effectively to serve the business. So this graph here is really just to illustrate all of the different roles that can be played on a team and how DISC can sort of show you where people sit and how this is going to influence whatever plan you're working on. Are they about getting results? Are they about, sort of getting results through people? Are they about analysis? This really just helps give you the data of your team. So key outcomes from our conversation today, really what DISC is all about is helping you know yourself. What are the strengths that are associated with your behavioral style? What are the blind spots? What are the time wasters? All of that is in your report. How to control yourself, how your potential limiting behaviors, like maybe being sort of adverse to analysis and adverse to analyzing risk, how is that influencing your role in your organization? And adapting for that, creating some professional development goals around that. Next is obviously knowing others. Who are your key stakeholders? Who's on your team? How is it that you need to show up to partner together? Or how is it that they might be challenging to you so that you can work on building that relationship? Knowing others. And then, like I said earlier on, is partnering with them. How do we partner with people that are different than us? One of the best decisions I've made in the last few years is hiring a virtual assistant. And I will tell you, I'm an ID and she is an SI. And thank goodness she's always 2 steps ahead of me, like always. Her brain, like I can't even, it blows my mind. Her ability to remember things and be 2 steps ahead of me comes with having just her behavioral strengths. So who are the people that you need to align with in order to be more effective in your role, in order to help you get your work done? I would also argue that commonly we marry our opposites as well. We partner with our opposites. So who do you need to partner with personally and professionally in order to be whole? So thanks you guys so much. Some of you have completed the DNA assessment before. And if you have, here is a QR code to a really great little workbook that you can download and sort of be a self-study guide to help you pull more from your assessment. All right. So if you have done this assessment with me, here's your opportunity for you to go deeper with that assessment by clicking on this QR code, downloading this debrief form, and completing it and answering some of the questions that I sort of outlined on the call. If you haven't, I can see Corinne's taking a picture. Give me a thumbs up when you're done. Awesome. Ryan's taking a picture. Give me a thumbs up when you're done, Ryan. Great. If you haven't done an assessment with me, we can do that. Here is a QR code to do an assessment and a debrief. It links you to our website. This is for purchase. If you want to purchase more than just one, or you have a group, just shoot me an email and we can do something more customized to whatever your needs are. So this is for people who haven't done the assessment to get it. And that really is it. I think the most important thing I want you to remember is to know yourselves, to know others, so that you can communicate more effectively, so that you can both serve your objectives. And yeah, just keep growing and keep learning. Because yeah, I think when we can work effectively together, we can go farther.